Look at your work calendar for tomorrow, that 10 o'clock block. You probably think it's just like a neutral container of time to discuss a project.
Right, just a standard meeting on the schedule.
Exactly. But it isn't. When you actually pull back the curtain on high-level corporate dynamics, that seemingly innocent calendar invite is, well, it's actually a highly calculated, invisible chess match.
Oh, without a doubt.
And if you don't know who framed the agenda before you even logged on, you have likely already lost the game.
We constantly fall into this trap, of viewing meetings as straightforward mechanical processes. The assumption is that you gather people, discuss a topic, and a decision just naturally emerges from the ether.
Like it just magically falls out of the sky.
Right, but the reality of how organizational decisions are actually forged is far more complex. I mean, it's layered with hidden agendas, culture friction, and these really subtle maneuvers that dictate outcomes long before anyone even takes their seat.
Well, today's source material dissects those exact maneuvers. We are unpacking this fascinating internal document titled BIC Meeting Summary - Session 4.
And it chronicles the real-world experiences of 3 seasoned professionals, Eva, Christina, and Tulia.
Right, so our mission for this deep dive is to extract their hard-won knowledge and basically translate it into a masterclass on navigating your own workplace dynamics.
Especially since we are looking at environments that demand intense strategic focus, particularly through the lens of Eva, who manages something called the F100M Committee.
Which sounds pretty intense just by the name.
It is. While the source document doesn't spell out the acronym, it's abundantly clear that the F100M Committee is a high-level geopolitical steering group.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, the text literally describes this program as a roller coaster driven by international uncertainties. We're talking about an environment where decisions have massive financial and international ripple effects.
So the stakes are astronomically high.
Exactly. When the external environment is that chaotic and unpredictable, your internal structures, your committees, your communication protocols, they must act as an absolute fortress. You have to lock down what you can control.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before you even step foot into that metaphorical fortress, we have to examine the pregame.
The communication before the communication.
Right. How do you prepare to communicate in a high-stress, unpredictable environment like Eva's F100M program? Usually, your first interaction with a stakeholder isn't in a boardroom, it's an email.
Yeah. The digital paper trail really sets the stage.
Exactly.
And the document brings in Christina's perspective to illustrate this. She works in procurement, which is a role inherently fraught with tension.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, procurement professionals are constantly negotiating, pushing back on unreasonable requests, and just trying to align demanding internal expectations with rigid external market realities.
So she's always the one having to say no.
Pretty much. And Christina was actively experimenting with using AI tools to draft her emails to manage this tension. But she ran into some process roadblocks.
Right, so it wasn't just a seamless magic trick.
No, not at all. It's not just plug and play. And this is where Tulia steps in with a really crucial piece of guidance.
What does she suggest?
She argues that AI shouldn't just be viewed as a basic writing tool or, a glorified spell checker. Instead, she frames it as a mechanism to improve strategic thinking and maintain emotional objectivity.
Emotional objectivity. I want to pause on that phrase because, we have all experienced the exact opposite.
Oh, definitely.
You receive this infuriating, totally unreasonable request from another department, and your first draft of the reply is fueled entirely by professional rage.
Yep, the classic per my last email energy.
Yes, you just want to type out a localized version of which you obviously ignored.
Which is the fastest way to trigger a defensive response and completely derail the actual business objective.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is why emotional objectivity matters so much. In these high-stakes, top-down decision-making scenarios, flexibility is incredibly limited. The parameters are extremely strict.
Right.
If you introduce emotional volatility into an environment that's already a geopolitical roller coaster, stakeholders stop focusing on the data and they start reacting to your tone. You lose control of the strategy.
It's essentially using AI as an emotional heat sink or like a buffer.
An emotional heat sink, yeah. I like
That
that.
like you can dump all your frustration, all that raw, messy context into the prompt, and the AI just strips the heat right out of it.
Right, reads your furious draft, extracts the core business need, maybe that you simply need the Q3 forecast by Tuesday, and hands you back a draft that preserves your strategic intent while removing the subjective emotion.
You keep the human element of the goal intact without burning the bridge before the meeting even starts.
Preserving that strategic intent is everything. By utilizing the AI as a filter, you force the conversation to remain anchored to the outcome rather than the interpersonal friction.
It's a really vital preparatory step. But, once those emails are sent and the tone is perfectly objective, the arena shifts.
You actually have to go to the meeting.
Right. You eventually have to walk into the room or log onto the call and occupy space. The source document transitions here from communication tools to personal strategy. They call it the geometry of professional presence.
They break this presence down into three distinct types: informational, representational, and strategic.
So let's define the mechanics of these. According to the breakdown, Christina identifies her presence as being about 80% representational,
Right.
meaning she is highly focused on inclusive discussions, ensuring all voices are heard, and representing the nuanced needs of her procurement department.
While on the other end of the spectrum, Eva identifies her presence as being 70% strategic.
Because of the F100M committee.
Exactly. Given her mandate to navigate that committee through geopolitical uncertainty, her focus is heavily skewed toward long-term goals, business stability, and driving the group toward concrete, actionable decisions.
But interestingly, both of these professionals expressed a strong desire to develop even more strategic influence.
Yeah, and Tulia makes a brilliant distinction here between simply creating recognition versus actively shaping outcomes.
Creating recognition is just making sure you're seen and heard, right?
Yes, shaping outcomes is actually moving the needle.
But wait, let me push back on this premise gently.
Yeah.
Because the way they phrase it, wanting to move toward a more strategic presence, it almost implies that a strategic presence is the ultimate goal. Inherently better.
It does sound a bit like a hierarchy.
Yeah, but if you are purely strategic and just driving for an outcome, don't you risk alienating the people doing the actual work? Isn't a purely representational presence, like Christina's focus on inclusivity, just as vital to ensure the decision actually survives contact with reality?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we've all been in meetings where a top-down strategy is mandated, but because nobody was consulted, the execution completely fails.
That is a really critical observation. And it highlights why these presences function as an ecosystem rather than a ranking system. Influence occurs at different stages of the decision-making process.
Okay, break that down for me.
An informational presence provides the raw data, the foundation. A representational presence is absolutely vital during the synthesis stage. You need that inclusivity to gather all the perspectives, identify potential blind spots, and ensure the team feels ownership over the process.
Right, because if you bypass that representational phase, as we said, you build resentment, not alignment.
Exactly.
So the representation builds the vehicle, but the strategy drives it.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The reason both Christina and Eva want to build their strategic influence is because at the executive level, the final stage is always execution.
Somebody has to actually make the call.
Right. You can gather all the representation in the world, you can synthesize every viewpoint, but eventually someone has to shape the outcome and steer the ship. In environments with limited flexibility, like the F100M program, they recognize that to advance their broader mandates, they need to master that final gear of decisive action.
That structural understanding makes total sense. But, driving that vehicle assumes the road ahead is relatively clear. As soon as you add other human beings to the mix.
Which you always have to do.
Exactly. You introduce friction, culture clashes, and even outright sabotage.
Yeah.
This is where the mechanics of the meeting really start to break down.
And the document dives deep into these culture clashes. It specifically highlights Eva's strong preference for clear, direct communication.
Right.
When she needs a quick decision to stabilize her committee, she gets incredibly frustrated by colleagues who rely on indirect communication styles.
Yeah, the source specifically points to the dynamic between German and French communication approaches and how heavily these cultural frameworks impact meeting effectiveness.
It's not just a matter of personal preference, right?
Yeah.
It's a fundamental difference in how information is processed and validated.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I find it helpful to look at this clash through the lens of a road trip.
Okay, a road trip.
Yeah, so direct communication, which is often associated with the German approach in this context, is like taking the highway. The objective is to get from point A to point B as fast and efficiently as possible.
You front-load the conclusion, state the bullet points, and push for a yes or no.
Exactly. Now, indirect communication, associated here with the French approach, is like taking the scenic route. You don't start with the conclusion, you start with the context, the theory, and the reasoning. building agreement on the premises before finally arriving at the destination.
And when those two styles are forced into the same 1-hour calendar invite, the friction is immediate.
Oh, instantly.
The direct communicator feels like the indirect communicator is just endlessly stalling and refusing to get to the point.
While the indirect communicator feels like the direct communicator is arrogant, dictatorial, and ignoring crucial nuance.
Right. And for Eva, managing this volatile F100M committee, she feels she only has time for the highway. Swift action is her literal mandate.
But sometimes that scenic route is necessary to preserve the landscape of team morale. I mean, if you just blast down the highway, you arrive at your destination only to realize half your passengers jumped out of the car out of frustration.
Yeah, and this tension inevitably breeds resistance. Eva specifically struggled with a resistive team member who kept trying to forcefully influence decisions.
Essentially trying to hijack the steering wheel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the source contrasts her struggle with a very different, highly effective countermeasure utilized by Christina in procurement.
This is how she handled what she called meeting saboteurs.
Yes, Christina employed this collaborative show and solve strategy. When they hit a technical issue or face resistance, instead of engaging in a verbal tug-of-war, she visually demonstrated the problem to the group and collaboratively offered solutions.
Let's dig into the anatomy of a meeting saboteur, because Christina's approach is fascinating. A saboteur usually thrives in the abstract. They weaponize doubt.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
use phrases like, I'm just not sure that timeline is realistic, or I feel like we are missing something, and you can't argue with a vague feeling.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. When Eva faces someone forcefully pushing an agenda, it escalates into a battle of wills. But Christina shifted the battlefield entirely.
How so?
By projecting a visual representation of the broken process, like a flowchart, a spreadsheet, a timeline, she dragged the issue out of the abstract and forced it into the concrete.
Ah, I
It's
saw.
incredibly difficult for a saboteur to maintain vague resistance against a hard visual data point.
She basically weaponized transparency by laying the problem out visually and asking the room, here's the broken step, how do we collaboratively fix it? She completely cornered the saboteur.
Yep. They are forced to either contribute constructively to the solution or just stay quiet. They can no longer hide in the fog of indirect complaints.
Wow. It's a masterful strategic application of a representational presence. She included everyone in the problem-solving process, which ironically shaped the exact strategic outcome she needed.
She didn't silence the saboteur. She simply removed the ambiguity they needed to survive.
But dealing with those saboteurs in the moment is exhausting. It requires immense energy and focus, which brings us to a concept in the summary that completely recontextualizes the whole process.
It's a big one.
Yeah. The most experienced professionals, Tulia, Eva, and Christina, they operate on the understanding that the real work does not happen between the start and end times listed on the calendar invite. The actual meeting is almost secondary to what they call the invisible game.
The document is so explicit about the absolute necessity of pre-alignment.
Pre-alignment, right?
Right. This is the practice of getting key team members on the same page before the formal meeting even begins. If you are walking into a high-stakes room to introduce a controversial idea or a major strategic shift for the very first time, your odds of success are remarkably low.
Let's look at the mechanics of pre-alignment. It means calling the key stakeholders a day early, testing the waters, addressing their specific concerns in private, and securing their tentative buy-in.
So when you finally sit down at the table, the outcome is largely a foregone conclusion.
The source also emphasizes ruthless boundary setting. When an unexpected topic suddenly pops up, which is often introduced by someone who wasn't pre-aligned and threatens to derail the agenda, the consensus is that you must park it immediately.
Though parking a topic requires a delicate touch to avoid insulting a stakeholder.
Right, you can't just tell them to be quiet.
No, you don't dismiss their point.
Right.
You validate its importance while fiercely protecting the current agenda. You say something like, that is a critical variable for our Q4 roadmap, and it deserves its own focus. Let's schedule a dedicated 15 minutes for that next week so we don't rush the analysis today.
You acknowledge the input, but you maintain the boundary. But the element of this invisible game that stood out the most to me was what happens after the meeting concludes. The source material fundamentally reframes the concept of meeting minutes and summaries.
It does. We tend to view taking minutes as a low-level administrative burden.
Yeah, a task passed off to the newest person on the team to just sort of dictate who said what. But the document frames this entirely differently, elevating meeting summaries to high-level executive communication.
It highlights that these summaries require dedicated individuals to carefully edit them,
Hmm.
especially when they are destined for external stakeholders, like bank executives.
Right.
Eva acknowledges that improving meeting documentation takes significant time, skill, and experience. It is an act of diplomacy, not dictation.
So, what does this all mean? Think about the power of the pen here. If you just transcribe raw notes, you might write, the engineering and finance leads argued for 20 minutes about budget constraints.
Which doesn't look great to a bank executive.
Not at all. But an experienced professional crafting a strategic summary will edit that to read, the committee rigorously reviewed budget constraints and achieved consensus on exploring alternative vendor models.
Exactly. The latter version creates a unified, professional reality for the executives reading it.
The chaotic performance in the room is just erased, and only the strategic outcome remains. The meeting itself is almost an illusion. The real decisions are negotiated in the pre-alignment hallways, and the reality of what happened is permanently cemented in how the minutes are edited.
This realization points directly to the final and perhaps the most potent concept introduced in the source document. Beyond the informational, representational, and strategic presences we defined earlier, the group acknowledged a fourth overarching category:
And what's that?
invisible influence.
Invisible influence. It almost sounds like a superpower.
Well, it sort of is. It's the ability to shape the corporate environment so profoundly that the outcomes naturally align with your strategy, often without you having to forcefully argue your case in the room.
Wow.
The person wielding invisible influence isn't necessarily the loudest voice at the table. They're the ones who define the parameters of the conversation during pre-alignment before anyone else even logged on.
Right.
They're the ones who gracefully park the saboteur's tangent. And they're the ones translating a messy, hour-long debate into a crisp, authoritative executive summary that becomes the official historical record of the organization.
They're architecting the entire container. It completely changes how you look at your own work week. I want you, listening to this right now, to pull up your calendar for tomorrow.
Take a real look at it.
Look at those blocks of time. When you log on to those calls, how are you actually showing up? Are you just acting as an informational presence, dropping your data and staying quiet? Are you leaning into a representational presence, ensuring your team is heard? Or are you pushing to actively shape the outcome?
Are you utilizing tools to maintain your emotional objectivity so you don't burn a bridge over a frustrating request?
Are you visually cornering the saboteurs, or are you letting them hide in the abstract?
It requires a thorough audit of your own daily habits. But as we wrap up this analysis, I want to leave you with one final lingering mystery straight from the source material.
Oh, the cliffhanger.
Yes. The document notes that at the end of their deep dive into influence, Tulia, Eva, and Christina arrived at a crucial question. But the summary explicitly states that this question remained completely unanswered in the transcript.
A literal cliffhanger buried in a corporate summary document. What was the question?
The unanswered question was this: who typically frames the narrative before the formal meetings?
Wow. That recontextualizes the whole process.
We began today by challenging the assumption of that simple calendar invite, the expectation that the meeting is just a neutral space.
But the space is never neutral.
It is built, framed, and directed by someone playing the invisible game. So as you navigate your own organization, your own committees, and your own geopolitical roller coasters, ask yourself, who is wielding that invisible influence around you? Who is framing the narrative before you even take your seat at the table?
And more importantly,
Why shouldn't it be you?